Good morning. The committee meets today to receive testimony from Admiral Mike Rogers, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, director of the National Security Agency, and chief of the Central Security Service. A lot of titles, Admiral. That's good. Thank you for your many years of distinguished service and for appearing before this committee today. Threats to our national security in cyberspace continue to grow in speed and severity. New attacks appear in the headlines on an increasingly frequent basis as nation-states, criminal organizations, and terrorists seek to leverage technology to steal, coerce, and deter. When you appeared before this committee in September, Admiral Rogers, you noted that we, quote, have peer competitors in cyberspace and that some of them have, quote, already hinted that they hold the power to cripple our infrastructure and set back our standard of living if they choose. Since that hearing, Russia has demonstrated the ability to cut power to hundreds of thousands of people in central and western Ukraine. This attack, the first confirmed successful cyber attack on a large-scale power grid, is terribly significant as it demonstrates the sophisticated use of cyber weapons as a destabilizing capability and an effective deterrence tool. With Russia, China, and other potential adversaries developing capabilities intended to deter us along with our friends and allies, we must develop not only an effective deterrence policy, but also the capabilities necessary to deter any nation seeking to exploit or coerce the United States through cyberspace. After significant urging by this committee, I believe the Defense Department has recognized this need, and important progress has been made at Cyber Command, but there's still a lot of work to do. For the most part, the services appear to be on track to meet the goal for the development of a 6,200-person cyber force. But unless we see dramatic changes in future budgets, I'm concerned that these well-trained forces will lack the tools required to protect, deter, and respond to malicious cyber behavior. In short, unless the services begin to prioritize and deliver the cyber weapon systems necessary to fight in cyberspace, we're headed down the path to a hollow cyber force. Just as it would be unacceptable to send a soldier to battle without a rifle, it's unacceptable to deprive our cyber forces the basic tools they need to execute their missions. Some service budgets omitted funding for even the most basic tools like those necessary for cyber protection teams to assess and triage compromised networks. This is unacceptable, and I look forward to hearing your assessment, Admiral Rogers, of the military services commitment to equipping the cyber force. I also look forward to hearing whether the new acquisition authorities we provided Cyber Command in the fiscal 2016 NDAA will help address some of these service-induced shortfalls. While I'm encouraged by some of the progress at the Department of Defense and Cyber Command, I remain concerned that the administration's cyber policy as a whole remains detached from reality. For years, our enemies have been setting the norms of behavior in cyberspace, while the White House sat idly by, hoping the problem will fix itself. Then in December, the administration provided its response nearly a year and a half late to this committee's requirement for a cyber deterrence policy. The response reflected a troubling lack of seriousness and focus, as it simply reiterated many of the same pronouncements from years past that have failed to provide any deterrent value or decrease the vulnerability of our nation in cyberspace. I applaud the recent efforts of the Justice Department to name and shame Iran for its cyber attacks against our critical infrastructure and financial sector. But again, I remain puzzled as to why it took nearly 5 years after Iran began attacking U.S. banks for the administration to begin doing so. That kind of indecisiveness is antithetical to deterrence, and our nation simply cannot afford it. Let me close by thanking you, Admiral Rogers, for your leadership at Cyber Command. You've always been very candid and forthcoming before this committee, and we appreciate that very much. We're finally beginning to field the cyber capabilities we need for the future. As we confront the challenges ahead, this committee remains committed to doing everything we can to provide you and the men and women you lead with the tools necessary to defend our nation in cyberspace. I look forward to your testimony. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I, too, would like to welcome Admiral Rogers back to the committee. Thank you, sir, and to express my gratitude to you, but also to the men and women that you lead, the military and civilians who work to secure the Department of Networks, support the combatant commands in cyberspace, and defend the nation against major cyber attacks. Cyber Command is at another set of crossroads. The committee received testimony last fall from multiple witnesses recommending elevation of Cyber Command to a full unified command. I understand that elevation has been discussed by the Joint Chiefs and that the Secretary is considering this recommendation as part of the Goldwater-Nichols reform effort. I would like to hear, Admiral, in your testimony and your comments, your views on the readiness of the command for elevation and on the related issue of sustaining the dual hat arrangement under which the commander of Cyber Command also serves as the director of the National Security Agency. 6 years after Cyber Command was established, the military services are just now presenting trained military cyber units to command. A little more than half of the planned units have reached initial operational capability. This is a major milestone, but trained individuals are only one part of military readiness. The other pieces are unit-level training and proficiency and equipping the forces. The Defense Department is only at the beginning phase of building a unit-level training environment. There are shortages and capability shortfalls in the toolkits available for the cyber protection teams, and the Department has not yet developed a plan for or selected a service executive agent to acquire foundational situational awareness and command and control systems for our cyber forces. I look forward to a status report from you, sir, about the pace of progress in these areas. There are other foundational challenges. The Department has deployed and is in the process of acquiring additional capable cybersecurity sensors at all layers of its networks, from the large perimeter gateways to the millions of individual computers spread across the globe. Cyber Command has dozens of cyber protection teams assigned to defend key segments of our networks, while the military services and the Defense Information Systems Agency have their own computer network defense organizations. A major task now is to integrate these sensors and organizations under joint operational concepts to enable real teamwork. And Admiral, again, I would be interested in your thoughts on this very difficult issue. I am pleased that Cyber Command is joining the initiative to leverage the innovation of the commercial information technology industry for both cybersecurity and its other missions. To keep pace with a rapidly changing threat, it makes sense to partner with an industry that innovates at the same pace. And Admiral, I'm interested in hearing how you plan to apply the acquisition authorities the committee granted to Cyber Command in last year's Defense Authorization Act to working with the information technology sector in particular. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I would note that Admiral Rogers, in his prepared statement for the hearing today, quoted the Director of National Intelligence to the effect that China is still engaged in economic theft in cyberspace, and that, quote, whether China's commitment of last September moderates its economic espionage remains to be seen. It is obviously a very serious matter if China does not live up to President Xi's pledge to President Obama. And again, I would be interested in your comments, sir, on this issue. Thank you for your service, and I look forward to your testimony.
Admiral Rogers, welcome back.
Thank you, sir. Good to be back. Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reid, and distinguished members of the committee, I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss the opportunities and challenges facing U.S. Cyber Command, and I'd like to thank you for convening this forum. It's an honor to represent the individuals of this fine organization, and I'm grateful for and humbled by the opportunity to lead this impressive team. I'm confident you'd be extremely proud of the men and women of U.S. Cyber Command if you saw their commitment to mission and hard-earned successes on a daily basis, as I am fortunate to do. While my written statement goes into greater detail, I'd like to briefly highlight the challenges we face in today's environment and also some of the initiatives the command is pursuing to meet those challenges. Over the last year, we've seen an increase of cyberspace operations by state and non-state actors. We've seen a wide range of malicious cyber activities aimed against both government and private sector targets. At U.S. Cyber Command, we focus on actors that pose a threat to our national interests through cyberspace. Nations still represent the gravest threats to our nation's cybersecurity, but we continue to watch closely for signs of non-state actors making significant improvements in their cyber capabilities. Malicious actors use cyberspace to steal intellectual property and citizens' personal information, and criminals' increasing use of ransomware to extort companies is a worrisome trend. Malicious actors have also intruded into networks, ranging from the Joint Staff's unclassified network to networks controlling our nation's critical infrastructure. These threat actors are using cyberspace, I believe, to shape potential future operations with a view to limiting our options in the event of a crisis. Despite this challenging environment, U.S. Cyber Command continues to make progress as it emphasizes shifts to operationalizing the command and sustaining its capabilities. Over the past year, we've continued building the capability and capacity of Cyber Command while operating at an increased tempo. We continue to make progress in building the cyber mission force of the 133 teams that will be built and fully operational by 30 September 2018. Today, we have 27 teams that are fully operational and 68 that have attained initial operational capability. And it's important to note that even teams that are not fully operational are contributing to our cyberspace efforts, with nearly 100 teams conducting cyberspace operations today. For example, the command continues to support U.S. Central Command's ongoing efforts to degrade, dismantle, and ultimately defeat ISIL. Last year, we noted we had just established the Joint Force Headquarters DoD Information Networks. Today, I can proudly report that JFHQ DODN, as we call it, has made great strides towards its goal of leading the day-to-day security and defense of the department's data and networks. Also, as the DoD expands the joint information environment, we will have significantly more confidence in the overall security and resilience of our systems. Our operations to defend DoD networks and the nation's critical infrastructure proceed in conjunction with a host of federal, industry, and international partners. Recognizing that DoD is just one component of the whole of nation cyber team, U.S. Cyber Command's own annual exercises, Cyber Flag and Cyber Guard, offer unmatched realism as we train with federal, state, industry, and international partners. Additionally, cyber mission teams and joint cyber headquarters are regular participants in the annual exercises of all the combatant commands. While our training is improving, we need a persistent training environment, which the department is continuing to develop to gain necessary operational skills and to sustain readiness across our force. I'm excited by the innovation, cultural shift, and focus on long-term strategy that is emerging in the command and the DoD. In the last year, we've established a point-of-partnership program in Silicon Valley to link command personnel to some of the most innovative minds working in cyberspace. Our program is aligned and co-located with the department's Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, or DIUX, and we are building on the synergy among all DoD elements under the DIUX umbrella. Last September, the department identified the need to transform DoD's cybersecurity culture by improving individual performance and accountability. The Secretary and Chairman approved the DoD Cybersecurity Culture and Compliance Initiative to address those concerns. Cyber Command was identified as the mission lead for this initiative and is working closely with the Joint Staff and OSD to build the requisite capacity and structure. Cyber Command is also actively contributing to the implementation of the new DoD cyber strategy. The strategy, released in April of 2015, provides a detailed plan to guide the development of DoD's cyber forces and strengthen DoD's cyber defense and cyber deterrence posture. The pervasive nature of cyberspace throughout all facets of life and across geographic boundaries, coupled with a growing cyber threat, makes deterrence in cyberspace a challenge, but ever more important. A proactive strategy is required that offers deterrent options to the President and the Secretary of Defense to include integrated cyberspace operations to deter adversaries from action and to control escalation. To help with all of this, we requested and received enhanced acquisition and manpower authorities, and I thank Congress and the President for the authorizations granted to Cyber Command in the fiscal year 16 NDAA. This represents a significant augmentation of our ability to provide capabilities to our cyber mission teams, as well as our ability to attract and retain a skilled cyber workforce. We are currently studying how to best implement those provisions and laying the groundwork needed to put them into effect, while in parallel evolving a formalized synchronization framework to optimize the employment of our cyber mission force. With that, thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for convening this forum and inviting me to speak.
Well, thank you, Admiral Rogers. General Dempsey was asked about our ability to address challenges to this country, and he stated that we have significant advantages in every major challenge except one, and that was cyber. Do you agree with General Dempsey's comment about a year ago?
I do. The phrase I use internally with him is cyber is one area we have to acknowledge that we have peer competitors who have every bit as much capacity and capability as we do.
That, I would say to my fellow members, the committee emphasizes our need to address this issue in a comprehensive fashion. So after we finish the defense bill, I will spend a great deal, this committee will spend a great deal of its time on this issue, since the threat is, as Admiral Rogers just stated. You stated last year in the House hearing there's still uncertainty about how we would characterize what is offensive and what is authorized. Again, that boils down ultimately to a policy decision, and to date we have tended to do that on a case-by-case basis. In other words, do we preempt? If we respond, how do we respond? All of those, it seems to me, are policy decisions that have not been made. Is that correct?
I guess, Chairman, the way I would describe it is we clearly still are focused more on an event-by-event particular circumstance. And I think in the long run, where clearly I think we all want to try to get to is something much more broadly defined and well understood.
So that you understand when you detect an attack or detect a probable attack. So right now you are acting on a case-by-case basis.
Sure.
Does Russia have the capability to inflict serious harm to our critical infrastructure?
Yes.
Does China have the same capability?
Some measure of the same capability, yes.
How has China's behavior evolved since the OPM breach?
We continue to see them engage in activity directed against U.S. companies. The questions I think that we still need to ask is that activity then in turn shared with the Chinese private industry? We certainly acknowledge that states engage in the use of cyber as a tool to gain access and knowledge. The question or issue we've always had with the Chinese is while we understand we do that for nations to generate insight, using that then to generate economic advantage is not something that's acceptable to the U.S.
Do you agree that the lack of deterrence or repercussions for malicious cyber behavior emboldens those seeking to exploit the U.S. through cyber?
Yes.
Admiral, we are looking carefully at a consolidation of command here as far as your responsibilities are concerned. I believe that the Secretary of Defense will also support such a move, so I will be recommending to the committee that we include that consolidation in the defense authorization bill as we mark up. I think my friend Senator Reid also agrees with that. Would you agree that probably the issue of cyber warfare is the least understood by all of our leadership, including in government, executive and legislative branch?
It's certainly among the least understood. I think that's a fair.
And is part of this problem is that this challenge is rapidly evolving?
I think that's clearly an aspect of it, the speed and the rate of change, as well as the complexity. It can be intimidating. I'd be the first to acknowledge that many people find this a very intimidating mission area.
If you had a recommendation for this committee and Congress as your significant 2 or 3 priorities, what would you recommend?
In terms of cyber overall?
Action that you'd like to see the Congress and the executive branch take.
I think we clearly need to focus on ensuring, number one, that we've got our defensive house in order and that we're able to defend our systems as well as our networks. And we need to think beyond just networks into our individual combat and weapons.
Which to me means a policy, but please go ahead.
Secondly, we need to continue to generate the complete spectrum of capabilities to provide options for our policymakers as well as our operational commanders. So when we have these issues, we've got a series of capabilities that we can say, here's some capabilities that we can choose from. And then lastly, I think we've just got to, the other point I try to make is we've got to figure out how to bridge across not just the DOD, but the entire U.S. government with the private sector about how we're going to look at this problem set in an integrated national way.
Would you also agree that sequestration could threaten you with a hollow force after you have recruited and some of the brightest minds in America to help you?
Oh, very much so. I would highlight in FY13, when we shut down the government, I can remember I was in a different job at the time, but still I was leading the Navy's cyber effort. And as much of my workforce said, so explain to me, Admiral, why we should stay with you if this is what we're going to have to deal with on an aperiodic basis, being told we're going to be furloughed, we're not going to get paid. I can remember telling them in 13, please stay with us. I hope this is a one-time thing.
But sequestration means further hampering of.
It means
your
further
capabilities.
because everything is, our ability to meet the timelines that we've been given have been predicated on the sustaining of the budgets. If we go to sequestration levels, I will not be capable of generating that capability in the timely way that right now we're on the hook to do.
Senator Reid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the issues that has been discussed, and I mentioned in my opening statement, is raising Cyber Command to a full unified command. And yet I also noted, and you acknowledged, that only half of Cyber Command's newly formed cyber mission forces are initially capable. They're IOC, I should say. And then some critical elements, such as persistent training environment, the uniform platform doesn't exist. Are you, in your mind, mature enough to be a full unified command now? Or?
Yes.
And what would that advantage give you? Or what would that decision give you?
So generally, when we think about what tends to drive should something be elevated to a combatant command, broadly across the department, we tend to focus on the imperatives of unity of command, unity of effort, and is it either, in this case, it would be a functional, not geographic.
Right.
And in this case, does the function rise to a global level, and is it of sufficient priority to merit coordination across the entire department? The other issue, I would argue, is one of speed. All of those argue, and again, I just am one input. I realize this is a much broader decision than just Admiral Rogers, and there's many opinions that will be factored in. My input to the process has been the combatant commander designation would allow us to be faster, which would generate better mission outcomes. I would also argue that the department's processes of budget, prioritization, strategy, policy are all generally structured to enable direct combatant commander input into those processes. That's what they're optimized for. And I believe that cyber needs to be a part of that direct process.
The other aspect, obviously, is the relationship with NSA. And there are several options. One is to have separate commanders. One is to have one commander with a dual hat. Or one option or additional option is to, at least at a future time, have the option to divide the dual hat arrangement. Can you comment on that issue?
So my recommendation has been, for right now, you need to leave them dual-hatted. Part of that is the very premise that we built Cyber Command when we created it 6 years ago, where we said to ourselves we were going to maximize the investments that the nation had already made in NSA in terms of infrastructure and capability. So because of that, we didn't have a huge military construction program, for example, for Cyber Command, and put these cyber mission forces, the 6,200, in different structures. We said we were going to take NSA's existing space as a vehicle to do that. So my input has been, for right now, based on the very model we created Cyber Command, where we really, in many ways, very tightly align these two organizations, that at the current time, it would be difficult, not impossible, first to acknowledge that. It would be difficult or less than optimal, in my opinion, to try to separate them now. But what I've also argued is, but we need to continue to assess that decision over time, and you need to make it a conditions-based assessment as to, at some point in the future, does it make more sense to do that?
And part of that is the fact that if you are a unified command, you will be developing alternatives to NSA capabilities.
Yes.
It's exclusive to Cyber Command, so that at some point you could have an infrastructure that looks remarkably like NSA, and the synergies you're talking about now aren't operational.
That's important, right? Yes, sir.
One of the issues is that you depend upon the services to provide you a great deal of resources. In fact, it is really, I think, interesting to note that only half of these identified units are released initially capable, and that there doesn't seem to be an intense training effort that's standardized and in place right now. What can you do, and what can we do to accelerate these units in terms of their maturity and their training environment.
So if I could, Senator, I'm going to respectfully disagree.
That's quite all right. You don't even, well, you have to be respectful.
Remember, we started this build process in fiscal year 13, and we said that we would finish it by the end of fiscal year 18 at full capability and ready to fight in a high demand environment. We're pretty much on track, as I've said publicly. If you look right now, in fact, in the last 2 months, I've actually managed to increase timeliness since the last assessment I did in February, where I publicly had said, based on the data as of the 1st of February, I believe that we'll meet IOC for 91% of the teams on time, and that we will meet FOC for 93% of the teams on time. In the 2 months since then, we're up. I managed to work with the services, and for IOC, we're up to about 95% of the force. And for FOC, we're at about 93. We're still at 93% of the force. So my only point is, I'm not critical of the services in terms of their generating the force. I think they're making a very good effort, and it's on track. It's not perfect, but it's not on track. They've also been very willing when I've said, what we need to do is ensure that we have one integrated joint capability to how we work cyber. So there's got to be one structure, one training standard. Every service has agreed to adhere to that. So in that regard, I'm also very comfortable with what the services are doing. What I think the challenge for us as I look over the next few years is we initially focused on those mission teams and the men and women in their training. What experience is teaching us, not unlike other domains, is, and as you both, the chair and ranking member, said in your opening statements, that's not enough. And so what we're finding now is it's the other things that really help enable capability that we've got to focus more on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reinhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rogers, in December last year, you published an article saying a challenge for the military cyber workforce, and you discussed, as you did in your written statement today, that the importance of growing and developing and maintaining this force. When you talked about, well, I guess it was the chairman in his statement, the 123 teams where you are right now and aiming to 133. What comprises a cyber team?
They come in several different types. There's what we call combatant command mission teams. Those are aligned with combatant commanders. They are generally designed to create offensive capability, if you will. There are cyber protection. Those are about, in that team, CCMTs, combatant commander mission teams. There are about 65 individuals on a team. If you look at cyber protection teams, slightly different missions, so different structure, different focus. They're at about 39 individuals per team. Each of those two teams, a combatant commander mission team, the cyber protection team, has a small subset of about 23 individuals on what we call support teams. So that just gives you a sense for the range.
Sure. And that's,
20 to
when you add all that together, that's when you come up with the 6,187. And as was brought out in the chairman's statement, you'd really have to know. Well, first of all, you're drawing from institutions that are training these people. This is new.
Right.
This is brand new to a lot of people, including a lot of people at this table. I know that in my state of Oklahoma, the University of Tulsa has really made great progress. In fact, your predecessor was out there and working with them, and I understand from Senator Rounds that a similar thing is happening in South Dakota. Mm-hmm. So you got these kids out there, they're learning this, they're determining what they're going to do for a career. Now, I think it's a good question when we ask the question, can we really depend on sustaining in this environment that we're in right now, these teams, this number, this workforce, so that individuals out there would be aiming their talents toward helping us because there's going to be a lot of competition for these kids. How confident are you that we're going to be able to maintain the level necessary to attract good people?
So experience to date says we're doing a good job in that regard, both for our ability to recruit and retain. What tends to drive that to date, our experience suggests, is the desire of men and women, whether they're civilian or in uniform, to be part of something bigger than themselves, to do something that matters, and to do something on a cutting edge. That, if you will, is really what powers the men and women of the teams.
Yeah.
I'm always talking to my fellow leaders about, so what are the advanced indicators that we should be looking at that would tell us that that trend is changing? There are a couple skill sets within the mission force that I've mentioned separately previously that I may, in fact, come back to the committee with to say, look, there may be some additional measures here, flexibility
That
to
would be a good
hire.
thing to do for the record, to come back, because I'm running out of time here, and a couple other things I wanted to get to. I agree with you when you say that the states that we watch most closely in cyberspace remain Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. At the same time, I noticed that there's an effort, and this came when our FBI director, James Comey, was in contact with these people, that China is trying to develop a closer relationship with us, when in fact, they're the ones that we're going to be watching. You're not entertaining any kind of a close relationship with them that might impair that
No, sir.
area. Okay, good. Yesterday in the an article came out on the GAO report that says the Pentagon doesn't know who's in charge for responding to a massive cyber attack. And they go on to talk about the Northern Command. They talk about what we are doing. They're talking about Homeland Security. And you're familiar with this report that came out yesterday?
No, I'm not,
Oh,
but I'm
okay.
familiar with the broad premise.
Well, okay, well, the conclusion of the report, and I'll just read this, and it says, "We believe that by issuing or updating guidance that clarifies roles and responsibilities of relevant DoD officials, DoD will be in a better position to plan for and support civil authorities in a cyber incident." This is a GAO report, so I suggest that you look at that and see if we have reached their conclusion so far. Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here and for the work you do. I appreciate it very much. We face a wide range of cyber threats from terrorist groups like ISIS, criminal hackers, and spies, and all the underlying. In nearly every briefing about our national security, I've asked about the issues of cybersecurity and protecting our power grids.
Yeah.
And it's a very important issue to me, and the amount of power that our little state produces for this country. In the short term, which cyber threat is most dangerous to the United States? I guess it may be our grid, our food supply, our water supply. What is most vulnerable that we should be working on?
Power and basic infrastructure, something always concerns me because the potential impact on the nation is very significant. Should we have significant issues there? I'd also argue one sector that I worry about a little bit is you look at the amount of personally identifiable information that is resident out there in a lot of areas. Healthcare is a good example where the amount of data that we have all provided to the medical world that is available out there on all of us and our families. That worries me about, and that's reflected, and you look at OPM, you look at the Anthem health insurance, large data concentrations are now increasingly become an attractive target because of the power of big data analytics. Massive amounts of data that 10 years ago we would have said to ourselves, no one could ever really comb through that to generate insights or find anything. It's just too large. You sure don't have those conversations anymore.
I mean, we talk about cyber, we keep talking about basically our corporate, corporate hacking, if you will, for proprietary reasons. And then you look at the military hacking that goes on for our defense reasons. But then you look at just the everyday life that we've come to expect that could be probably disrupted with quite alarming,
Yes, sir.
alarming concerns. The other thing, in your testimony, you mentioned that the Guard and Reserve Forces are being assigned to all levels of U.S. Cyber Command and the Cyber Mission Forces. Can you elaborate on what the reserve component, specifically the National Guard, bring to the table for the cyber mission?
Well, you're able, through our Guard and Reserve teammates, you're able to access a set of manpower that potentially is using these same skill sets in their day-to-day work in the private sector. you're able to also access, at times, a very different perspective, which works out very well, which is one reason why, as we were creating this cyber construct for the department, we were adamant from the beginning it needed to be viewed as a total force. That if we were just going to make this an active-only component, that was not going to optimize the full range of capabilities that are out there. And so you've seen in the last 6 months in particular, the Guard and Reserve capability starting to come online and flesh out as well.
The thing that I'm saying is the National Guard in West Virginia, we don't have a base, and our Guard is everything to us. And being a former governor, I understand the importance of our Guard, but we've been so active as basically the aggressive recruiting, and some of our best and brightest and youngest people are coming into the Guard for all the opportunities, especially educational.
Right.
It's an area where they could designate and pinpoint for you to bring in some of these really sharp young talents that could help us in defending ourselves cyber. I didn't know if you all looked at that.
Which is the Guard is doing now.
And you all are in, okay.
Well, John Grass and I spent a lot of time talking about how do we do this in an integrated way.
Again, well, the other thing, in your testimony you state that ISIS' main cyber effort is focused on propaganda, recruiting, and radicalization of others. Can you elaborate further on this disturbing statement and how they've been successful?
They've harnessed the power of the information arena to promulgate their ideology on a global basis, to recruit on a global basis, to generate revenue and to move money, as well as coordinate some level of activity on a large dispersed basis. The challenge I look for, or that concerns me when I look at the future, is what happens if the non-state actor, ISIL being one example, starts to view cyber as a weapon system? That would really be a troubling development.
In a very simplistic way, people ask, why can't we shut down that part of the internet? Why can't we interrupt ISIS's ability to go on social media and attract? Why are we not able to infiltrate that more?
I mean, the idea that you're just going to shut down the internet, given its construction and complexity, is just not.
I've had people ask me,
Right,
can't you
gonna
just
be
stop it from
realistic.
that area of the world where all the problems are coming from, whether it be in Syria or in parts of Iraq or Iran, things that we might have some input and control over. It's
Right.
not possible.
It's just not that simple. I wish I could say that there's a part of the internet that is only used by a specific set of users, but there are all.
I'm just trying to
sorts of
find an answer.
individuals out there. Yes, sir.
That question is asked quite
No,
a
roger
bit. Just
that.
shut her down like turning off your telephone, but it doesn't work that way. Thank you for your service. Any way this committee can help, I'm sure we'll be there for you.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral Rogers, thank you for your service. You are, I believe, the right person at a very challenging time. You're in the middle of some decisions that have to be made by the United States as sooner rather than later. Our Congress passed, well, Carl Levin was chairman then. We passed a requirement that the Defense Department evaluate vulnerability of our systems and to issue a report to how to defend those. That time passed, but we've issued another legislation last year that said the Secretary of Defense shall, in accordance with the plan, complete an evaluation of the cyber vulnerabilities of each major weapons system of the Department of Defense not later than December 31st, 2019. So we've given an additional date there, but not later than 180 days after the date of this enactment, which I believe would be about May this year. The Secretary of Defense shall submit to the Congressional Defense Committees the plan of the Secretary for the evaluation of major weapon systems, including an identification of each system to be evaluated, an estimate of the funding required, and priority among the evaluations. Are you familiar with that, and are we on track to, is the Defense Department on track to complete that initial report?
I am familiar with it. I'm sorry, I am not in the weapon acquisition business, so I'm not the best informed as to the current status. I know the effort is ongoing because we, U.S. Cyber Command, are part of that broader effort, partnering with AT&L. If I could just take that one for the record, sir, I apologize.
Well, if you would, because this has been going on some time. So on a bipartisan basis, Congress recognized several years ago that our weapon systems, it started out for space, missiles, and anti-missile systems being evaluated, and then we realized large segments of our defense capability are vulnerable, and we've had a broader report. I believe it is important for the Secretary to complete this on time, if not sooner. I would hope that you would look at that.
Sure.
In light of Chairman McCain's questions and Senator Inhofe's questions, I would refer to this GAO report that just came out. The first line of this article is, quote, "The Pentagon does not have a clear chain of command for responding to massive cyber attack on domestic targets in the United States, according to the federal government's principal watchdog, GAO." Does that concern you?
First of all, I haven't read the report, sir, so I'm not informed as to its specifics. I mean, I would argue, hey, I'm always concerned about a clear chain of command and a clear articulation of responsibilities.
Well, it lists a number of things that do appear to be unclear in how we respond. And the chairman asked you, aren't we going to need to develop a policy for how to respond to attacks and what we might do in response and how to ratchet up responses relevant to the threats that we face. So I hope that you would look at that. With regard to the worldwide situation, there's commercial and economic and private companies that are a big part of the entire network of cyber worldwide. Many of those impact our allies, our friends, and many of those companies could be based in countries that are not friendly to us and would like to penetrate our systems. Are you concerned that all of our allies, Asia, Europe, need to be aware of this danger, and are we working to make sure that segments of those systems aren't purchased or impacted by entities that could be hostile to our joint interest?
So I share your concern about supply chain vulnerability, is the phrase we use to
That's a
describe.
good word, supply chain
that.
vulnerability, okay.
And it is growing in probability, if you will, given the nature of the economic world we're living in now. We have a process within the U.S. government to address these issues for major purchases, companies, national security priorities. We have a specific process in place for some components of DoD infrastructure, like the nuclear world, for example. But if you look at its proliferation of the issue generally across both our allies and ourselves, this is an issue that's only going to get tougher, not easier.
Could be going on for decades, it seems to me. And do we need to meet with our allies to develop a unified policy to protect our joint systems?
It is a discussion we have with our allies, and it's much, as you said, this goes across the commercial sector, DoD, government writ large. It's out there for all of us.
Well, I thank you for your leadership. There'll be a lot of challenges like that in the months to come, and you're at the focal point of a critical issue, and I hope you'll not hesitate to lead and tell us what we need to do to help you.
Roger that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rogers, I need some clarification of what your responsibilities are in Cyber Command. Are you responsible for protecting this country from cyber attacks on private networks and corporations, or is it simply government networks?
So DoD has a responsibility to defend critical infrastructure against events of significant cyber consequence.
So critical infrastructure, that, for example, in May, we had 3 urgent care centers that were hacked. We had Maine General Health, which is one of our major health care. They were hacked. Is that part of your, what's the definition of critical infrastructure?
No, there are 16 segments that the federal government has identified as having significant implications for the nation's security. But the second component, I would argue, of the definition I gave you of the mission is not just the sector that was attacked, so to speak, but also the magnitude of the event. In DoD, we use the phrase significant cyber consequence. The concern being the Department of Defense is not resourced, nor is it currently tasked with defending every single computer structure within the United States. And so we try to identify where can our finite resources be best applied? And so they're focused on those 16 segments that have been designated as critical to the nation's infrastructure, and then tripped in those circumstances in which the actions against one of those 16 segments reaches significant cyber consequence.
But in terms of national defense, it's death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, we're being hacked every day in insurance companies, businesses. Some of it is cyber espionage, as you point out, but some of it is some of it's criminal. But it seems to me we need to be thinking about who is responsible. I mean, I understand you don't call out the Army if there's a criminal in one town. You have local police, but there's a gap here. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
There's a gap in our defenses because we really don't have the infrastructure of the state police or local police that would protect local interests when they're being attacked, and you have the expertise. We have to work out something as between Cyber Command and local law enforcement, if you will, to protect us from these repeated and continuous and escalating attacks.
Although if I could, I'd urge us to think more broadly than just Cyber Command. I think the challenge is, how do we harness the capacity and capability that is resident within our government structure, teamed with the capabilities that are resident in the private sector? It's much bigger than just, don't get me wrong, we're definitely a part of this. But I always urge people, we have got to think much more broadly than
Well,
just the
I think
DoD.
that's a good way to articulate it. We keep talking in these hearings, when are we going to have a well-developed and articulated cyber deterrent strategy? And I emphasize in my notes, I underlined the word articulated. It's not deterrence if it's not articulated. But we need definition of what is an act of war, what is a proportional response, what is a mutually assured destruction situation. This, it seems to me, is this in the works, and if so, when?
I mean, sir, I don't have a date for you. That's well beyond the mission set of U.S. Cyber Command. I am part of those discussions. I'm the first to acknowledge that. I try to provide an input and just be one voice as to what I think is the direction broadly that we need to go. I apologize, Senator. I don't have a specific date or timeline for you.
It just seems to me that as a matter of policy, that we really need, this needs to happen. We've been talking about this as long as I've been on this committee, and we aren't there yet, and yet something terrible is going to happen, and a lot of people are going to say, well, why didn't we have a policy? Why don't we have a deterrent policy?
Yes,
so I would urge you and the councils of the administration to push for a sense of urgency on this question, because if all we do is defense and there's no deterrence, ultimately we're going to lose that battle.
Yes, sir. It's a losing strategy.
Final point, and I know that you talked about this earlier, I'm finding it harder and harder to justify you're holding two jobs, given the complexity. I mean, this arrangement was created in 2009, which in technological terms is a century ago, and I just can't. I mean, I understand the relationship between NSA and Cyber Command, but particularly if we move in the direction, which I think we are, of setting up Cyber Command as its own independent combatant command, to have the same person trying to run those two agencies, I just think is impractical and almost impossible.
I've been doing it for 2 years to date.
And you've been doing it very well.
So as I said in my initial comment, I agree that it's something we need to continue to assess. I agree that in the long run, the probably best course of action is to ultimately put both organizations in a position where they're capable of executing their mission in a complementary and aligned way, but in a more separate way. But the reality is we're just not ready to do that today, I believe. Now, don't get me wrong, if I am ordered or directed, I get paid to make things happen, and I will execute it to the best of my ability.
But I take it you agree that we should Cyber Command should be its own combatant command.
I do, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Subject to the will of the entire committee, that would be my intention, and Senator Reid and I would propose that on the defense authorization bill. Right, Jack?
I think so, sir. I think that's something we're going to consider, but I think it's valuable to have Admiral Rogers' comments today and to consider them as we go forward.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the discussion on raising cyber to its own combatant command, and I look forward to our discussions as a committee on the importance of cybersecurity for this country. Admiral Rogers, in your prepared statement, you mentioned the cyber attack on Ukraine's power grid, and you also note that you have seen cyber actors from more than one nation exploring the networks of our nation's critical infrastructure. Do you believe that our national mission teams possess the necessary skills relating to industrial controls and SCADA systems to be able to stop or to recover from an attack on our power grid?
We have the skills. The challenge for us at the moment is one of capacity. What I mean by that is, in the 2 years I've been in command, I have yet to run into a situation where we didn't have a skill set to apply against the problem. But the challenge at the moment, because we're still in the midst of that build, is sometimes that skill set is embodied in an incredibly small number of people. And if we had multiple events simultaneously, for example, that gets to be under the where we are right now. If you snap the chalk today, so to speak, capacity really is the greater concern to me than capability, if you will, if that makes sense.
Well, I understand your demands on the force to exceed that capacity, but as you add those capabilities, how are you going to prioritize the duties and the responsibilities that you're going to have? How do you plan to prioritize placing that building competency with our industrial control system? Is that going to be something you're going to focus on in the near term, or is it going to take a back seat to maybe some of the other areas that you're looking at for the cyber mission forces?
So it's something we're doing right now. I would also highlight that the very construct of the force, by creating a separate section of the force that is focused purely on defending critical infrastructure, was designed to account for that. How do you make sure you prioritize this capability and ensure that at least an element of the force that we are building is focused like a laser on the defend the critical infrastructure mission set? It's a carved out separate entity. It's the National Mission Force, we call it. General Nakasone is my component commander doing that. But
Do you have a plan to work with the services then on building that profile?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Is it near completion? You heard Senator King ask about policy. We've been asking about policy for a long time. We don't have a policy, but so if we don't have a policy, how are we going to develop plans?
Well, my remind people is, look, even as we're trying to get to the broader issues that you have all raised, much of which is outside the immediate mission set of Cyber Command, hey, look, our mission is generate capacity and capability, ensure that we're ready to go as those broader issues are being addressed. So we're trying to deal with the deterrence piece by generating the capabilities that we think would be part of that deterrence discussion, by generating the defensive capabilities that we think would be part of that deterrent discussion. I don't want to wait for everything to fall in place, that we just can't afford to do it that way, as perfect as it would be in some ways. But
I agree with you. We don't have time to wait.
yes, ma'am.
When we look at the department, what level of communication do you have with different communities within the department, say with regards to acquisition or installations, to ensure that the items we purchase or the facilities that we're building are able to take those threats that we're looking at from cyber into account?
I would tell you the acquisition piece is one of the areas that we still need a lot of work. And it's not because people aren't working hard. But I've always been struck by the analogy, we would never buy a ship, a tank, an aircraft without the operational vision driving exactly how we designed it, built it, structured it. And yet, for much of our networks and infrastructure, that has not historically been our model. We just built those, we bought those, we focused on efficiency and price. We didn't really focus on operational impact, and we really didn't think at the time that we'd be dealing with a world in which intruders, foreign actors, non-state actors would be using those systems as access points to materially degrade our ability to execute our missions as a department. We just didn't anticipate that decades ago, and that's the world we're in now. We're trying to overcome
Well,
literally,
it's happened in private industry.
right, decades of investment we're trying to overcome.
And do you, last question, do you have any knowledge if our adversaries have targeted any infrastructure on our military bases?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Rogers, for your extraordinary and distinguished service in so many roles over so many years. I want to focus on the challenges of recruiting young people in an age where the, the best and the brightest who have knowledge in this area have so many opportunities, many of them highly paid and challenging in their professional issues. Young Americans are entering the workforce with computer technology that has been part of their entire lives. Not so much for us of a certain age, but for them, yes. And I wonder if you could tell us how successful you and the obviously incomparably important forces under your command have been in recruiting and maintaining talent in this time, and what we can do to help.
I'm very comfortable with where we are on the uniform side. The same things that lead a young man or woman in our nation to decide they want to pick up a rifle and take on that challenge leads men and women to decide they want to put on a uniform and pick up a keyboard. That has not been the biggest challenge. The area that I've told the team we probably need to take a greater look at is on the civilian side of this. Because we have got, our vision is you've got to create a workforce that is both active and reserve military as well as civilian component to it. So we get that breadth of expertise that you've referenced. While we're meeting our targets right now on the civilian side, as I've said, there's a couple skill sets already where I think I'm going to have to come back to the committee to say, look, I could probably need some help here with, can I come up with some different processes or options that would make things more attractive to particularly some very high-end, very small number of skill sets that I don't have huge numbers of, but they're incredibly valuable for us. That's one area where I'm thinking I'm probably going to have to come back. I have to work this with the department first, but my experience is telling me, you know, Mike, we need to step back and take a look at this piece of it.
Is there sufficient, are there sufficient resources devoted to research, the personnel available to supervise that research and, in effect, planning for the future?
Right. I mean, there's never, I'm not going to pretend for 1 minute that you have all the people and all the money and that you would like. It's, I would argue, characterize it as reasonable right now. It's not a major issue in the sense that as a commander, I've said to myself, wow, we've got a significant deficiency here that will impact our ability to execute the missions. I haven't seen that.
I know that you indicated earlier that you haven't read the GAO report.
Right.
But I wonder, focusing on the local capability, and particularly on the private sector, the infrastructure segment that you mentioned earlier in some of your conversations with my colleagues, transportation, financial, electric, how well are they doing in protecting themselves?
I would, if you look across the 16 segments in the private sector that have been designated as critical infrastructure in terms of impact on the nation's security, I would argue some are ahead of others. I'd probably put financial, for example, not surprising in the sense that has access to more resources than some, has come to the conclusion that cyber potentially calls into question their very business model, since it's built on the idea of trust and the ability to move funds globally simultaneously through these transactions, if you will, that we all believe in and trust. And on the other hand, there are some industries, in their defense, I look at them and they're quick to remind me, hey, remember, our business model is different. We're a regulated industry, for example, in order to generate resources to apply to increase our cyber defense, our cyber capabilities. The only way for us to do that is raise rates, for example. Most consumers not really enthusiastic about that. Most regulatory bodies not necessarily overly enthusiastic about that at the moment.
And those regulated industries would be electricity.
Like power is an example.
Yeah.
There's a couple of others that fall into that.
And are there unregulated industries that are also in need of improvement that you would put at the bottom of that list of readiness?
There are some. I think I've publicly previously talked about healthcare, for example, is one of the 16 segments I look at, and I go, that's an area probably that needs a broader top to bottom look. Although I'm the first to acknowledge it's really outside my immediate mission area, and I don't bore into it every day. But as I look at where potentially we're going to be tasked to provide our capabilities to partner with, it's an area that I pay attention to.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rogers, first of all, thank you for your service. I find it interesting that as you work your way through this, you're in a brand new area, and you're trying to determine how to respond and how to protect. It seems that when you lay this out and you say that you have 16 different segments within the realm that you're responding to, fair to say that they break out into either information or data systems and operating systems in terms of the way that we look at what the data is, or the different systems that we're looking at as being vulnerable? A data system being the collection of information on individuals, and operating systems being those systems perhaps necessary for the infrastructure within our country. A fair way to break out.
I guess that's fair. To be honest, Senator, I've never really thought of it that way. Not that that's a bad way, I just haven't.
Well, the reason that I ask is it would seem that while information systems would contain material, information that would be of a private nature perhaps, trade secrets, it may very well be information on an individual, such as the information that we lost to the federal level when our federal systems were hacked. At the same time, we have an operating system out there for the utilities. We have operating systems out there for dams. We have operating systems for nuclear power plants. Clearly, in those areas, if someone with intent could get into an operating system, they could do significant amount of damage and perhaps bodily injury as well. Fair to
Yes.
look at it. Based upon that, when you look at your role and the role of Cyber Command, do you see this as protecting? Do you see them different in terms of how you protect, or do you see your role different with operating systems versus data and information collection systems?
So our protection scheme, if you will, is based on two different pieces of strategy. The first component of our strategy is our intent is to go into foreign space to stop the attack before it ever reaches those systems. The second component of our strategy is to apply defensive capability working directly with each of the individual elements, if you will, to say, if that fails, we'd also like to work with you on how you might shore up your systems and your vulnerability. The other point I want to make sure I articulate, and I probably should have done a better job this morning, is as a reminder, U.S. Cyber Command and DoD writ large provide our cyber capabilities in the defense of critical infrastructure in the private sector in partnership and in support of DHS. DHS has overall responsibility in the federal government for the provision of government support to the private sector when it comes to cyber. And so I don't want people thinking, well, it's just Cyber Command and just the private sector. There's a broader set of players out there that we integrate with and we support as we execute the mission.
An attack in either case would be done in milliseconds, fair to say. So unless we have the system in place and we know whether or not we are there to respond or to correct, to protect in advance, we don't know whether or not we're going to be able to do it in time. At that point, then we simply respond afterwards. Would you say that today we have systems in place to appropriately protect, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call the operating systems and the information systems that we have? Do you feel that the protocols are there? And I'm going back to what Senator King was alluding to earlier. I'm not sure that we have the definitions prepared yet to allow you to respond immediately within milliseconds, unless we talk about it and we lay it out. Is it there today?
So across the board with every single component of the private sector, no, it's not. The other point I would make is cyber is no different than other domains in the sense that The importance of intelligence to provide us insight as to what is likely to be coming at us gives us the knowledge and insight, the warning, if you will, to anticipate and act in advance. It's every bit as true for the CENTCOM commander as it is for me as Cyber Command. Warning continues to be critical for both of us.
Today, if our forces were aware of an attack on them, they have the ability to respond. But if it was property or entities that are within the United States, do you have the ability to respond today if it is not a military, but a civilian or a civil target?
So is there a process? Yes. Is it something that I can do automatically, instantaneously? No.
Then in that case, then it has to happen first then, because for all practical purposes, the attack will be instantaneous.
Or we have to get the warning in advance, that importance of intelligence.
But even if you get the warning in advance, in terms of, it would have to be enough time for you to get out and to have a political discussion for all practical purposes about whether or not you can respond.
Again, it would depend by the scenario, because there's some elements where we've got mechanisms in place for the application of capability. It's just a process, if you will, as opposed to a broad.
But not one that can be
political
done in
decision.
milliseconds.
But right, no, I'm not going to pretend for 1 minute that it's something you're going to do in milliseconds.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for being here.
Senator.
Let me start with your acquisition personnel. Some of the saddest stories of waste have been in the acquisition of IT within the military, frankly, within government. And a lot of that has had to do with, knowing what you need to buy, and when you need to buy it, and when legacy systems need to be scrapped, and how nimble can you be with off-the-shelf. I'm not sure the military has been a great example of that flexibility and the ability to move with the technology. So I think these acquisition personnel are pretty important. And so do you have the 10 in place that are that we authorized in order for you to make the wisest acquisition decisions possible in light of a history littered with serious mistakes and lots and billions of dollars wasted?
Well, first, just a reminder, remember, Cyber Command, I operate and defend. I don't buy. You have been kind enough, the committee and the Congress has been kind enough to provide, if you will, an initial capability to do us. We're in the process of hiring those 10 individuals that you have authorized. I am very mindful of, as I remind the team, it is about generating outcomes, guys. That's why we're granted this authority, and that's what we need to be mindful of. I'm not interested in spending money for the sake of spending money. It's about generating capabilities that directly impact our mission in a material way.
Well, I would be interested in how you are acquiring, with more detail, if you
Yes,
would
ma'am.
provide it, how you are finding the right acquisition personnel, and how competitive are we in finding the right acquisition personnel? Because in many ways, I think that's the key to the kingdom. If we're going to have the capabilities in this space, a lot of it is, people being trained, but a lot of it is also
Oh,
the
yes, ma'am.
underlying
You have to buy the right
capabilities.
capabilities.
And so I'm really worried about getting the right people
ma'am.
making those decisions. So I would like to stay updated in that progress. What kind of coordination is your command have at this point with our NATO allies, with Israel, with our Arab allies? And I'm particularly interested in any coordination and cooperation you have with NGA.
So I'm not going to publicly in an
Obviously.
classified forum go into the specifics. I would only tell you, we partner with, we have a handful of nations right now. We have a very direct, very real relationship with respect to capabilities, real-world operations. I won't go into the specifics of the who. One of the challenges I find is cyber, like any other mission area, we have got to prioritize. So when I look at foreign partnerships, I ask, where is the greatest return for us as a department, as a DOD, and where's the greatest return for us, U.S. Cyber Command, in terms of the ability to execute our mission? Because I spend almost as much time with a discussion with the team about what we're not going to do as what I discuss what we are going to do. Because I always remind them, particularly since we're still in the midst of building this capability out, prioritization, 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 guys. We can't do everything. And so we've identified an initial set of foreign partners, if you will. Those partnerships today are generating capability that we're actually using today.
Great. And maybe in a classified setting, I could get more information.
Yes, ma'am.
What is the ratio of civilian versus military within the command at this point?
It's about, we're trying to build to about 80% military, 20% civilian. If you looked at it today as a snapshot, it's probably, off the top of my head, 70-30, 70% military, 30% civilian.
And what about contractors? What is the ratio on contractors, and what is your goal on contractors? Because this could be an area, and of
Right.
course, you know, underlying that is a concern about the actual screening of contractors. What is your ratio now of contractors to DOD, and what do you want it to be going forward?
We probably right now, apologize, I'm trying to do the math in my head. It's probably about 25%. We have an addition, over and above the government, civilian, and military, we have an additional 25%. Off the top of my head, we have about an additional 25% on the contractor base.
And is that where you would like to be going forward, or do you see more reliance on contractors going forward?
I'm a little bit leery of over becoming reliant on contractors. Why? Because I try to remind people, cyber is a domain in which we conduct a wide range of military operations. And in accordance with the law of armed conflict, those operations need to be conducted by military personnel. So I'm not trying to minimize the role of contractors. I just try to remind the team it's not one size fits all. So we've got to step back and ask ourselves, what's the right allocation? I'm pretty comfortable right now. I wouldn't argue that it's among my highest priorities in terms of increasing the ratio of contractors. I'd argue right now, probably priority number one, manpower-wise, as I've said, is the civilian piece. I'm very comfortable with, we're tracking and we're going the right way in the uniform piece. The civilian areas where I know I'll be paying more attention to in the coming year.
Thank you, Admiral.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your fine work, Admiral. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The threats nation state-wise in terms of who we're most threatened by?
I would argue Russia, and again, the probably in terms of you look at capability, the other four that we have publicly acknowledged we pay great attention to, China, Iran, North Korea, and then the non-state actor is the other category where I look that could be a game changer where there's some of the dynamics to change.
On the terrorism side, could you give us the top couple of terrorist organizations you're worried about?
It's not that I don't know it on an unclassified form.
Okay, we don't go down that
If I
road.
could, thank you, sir.
On the criminal side, what areas of criminality do you worry the most about? What countries?
I would argue right now Russia probably has the most active criminal element with the greatest capability.
Do you think the Russian government's doing anything constructive in terms of regulating their criminal activity in cyber?
I would only say it doesn't appear to be getting much better.
What about Iran? Has Iran gotten better in the last year in terms of their cyber activity?
Yes.
Are they less threatening?
I apologize, I'm not sure.
Are
you
they
mean
less threatening or just more capable?
I'd argue they're increasing their investment, they're increasing their level of capability. We have not seen the same level of activity from them that we have seen historically in the past. I have seen some of that same activity directed at other nations and other groups around the world.
They're improving their capability?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if any of the money they're getting from the Iranian nuclear deal is going into their cyber upgrades?
I don't know for a fact.
Okay. Is it fair for the country to establish as a policy cyber dominance over enemies, that we want to have a dominance in this area of warfare?
I mean, I would argue we want to have the same level of capability and supremacy in cyber as we have articulated that we want in every other.
Okay, well, I think that's a
for our
good goal,
nation.
so let's march down that path. And I associate myself with Senator King about what we need to do as a nation. The Navy, the difference between the Chinese Navy, the Russian Navy, and the American Navy is pretty wide.
Yes, sir.
In the cyber arena, how close is it?
I have publicly stated before the Russians I would consider in cyber peer competitor. China, not in the same place, but rapidly attempting to get there.
So the gap between the dominance we have on the seas and cyber is not nearly.
Not nearly the same.
Okay. When it comes to Iran, when you compare their Air Force to our Air Force, what's the gap?
Oh, significant.
Okay, in the cyber arena, less significant?
Less significant, but it's still an area of significant advantage for us right now.
Are the Iranians trying to close it?
Oh, they are.
So from a NATO point of view, you're familiar with Article 5, an attack against
Sir.
one is an attack against all. Is there any such concept in the cyber arena?
You've heard NATO publicly talk about the fact that they believe Article 5 applies to all domains of warfare.
Do they have any rules of engagement that would identify what a cyber attack is?
They're probably in the same arena. We are still trying to work our way through that.
When do you think we'll arrive at a conclusion to Senator King's question?
Boy, I don't know the point.
What's the biggest impediment to us getting there? Is it the Congress? Is it the...
No. It's as much in some ways as, and again, this is just Mike Rogers' opinion, it is much in some ways from my perspective as, well, this is just an intellectual exercise. This is something we can afford
The
to
Department of
push
Homeland
down.
Security is responsible basically for protecting us in the financial service, power arena, our civilian targets.
Sir.
You're responsible for protecting the military infrastructure,
And to provide support to that commercial
That's right.
infrastructure if
but
requested.
you're also responsible for going on offense.
Yes, sir.
HS is not going to attack a foreign nation, you would.
Yes, sir.
So how could we as a nation, given the threats that we face in the cyber arena, not really have a good answer as to what's the impediments to creating rules of engagement?
I apologize, sir. You really need to speak to the policy side.
Yeah, but you're an operator.
Yes, sir.
So who do you talk to about, hey, guys, let's see if we can get there?
So the Secretary of Defense or the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
How do they respond?
I think intellectually, we all realize that that's what we need to do. It's generating that consensus, I think.
Is there
we're on.
anything Congress is not doing that you would like us to do to help resolve this issue?
No, I can't argue that it's something that Congress has failed to do. I don't see that.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, I know that you talked a little about cyber teams in response to our to earlier questions, and I think the idea to leverage our outstanding National Guard capabilities and capacity in establishing many of these cyber teams is a good idea. As you and your colleagues look to establish additional cyber units in the future, and while I'm sure you're looking at this region, meaning the Pacific region, I ask that you look closely at the needs of the Asia-Pacific region. In Hawaii, for example, as you well know, we have PACOM, NSA Hawaii, various component commands, and other agency regional offices that are likely targets for cyber criminals. And, you know, as we focus on the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific, obvious. I wanted to get to a question. Last September, the U.S. and China did agree that neither government would support or conduct cyber-enabled theft of intellectual property. Now that we are 6 months down the road, would you say that China is living up to this agreement?
Well,
And I don't know how specific the agreement was, frankly, but, you know, it seemed like a good idea for the two countries to enter into that kind of a dialogue and discussion, but really, what is happening with regard to that agreement?
So if I could, what the agreement said was neither nation would engage in that activity for the purpose of gaining economic advantage for their private sector. We continue to see Chinese activity in this regard. The million-dollar question is that activity for governmental purposes, or is it being then passed from the government to the private sector? From my mind, the jury is still out in that regard. Its activity level is somewhat lower than prior to September of 2015.
But is there any way that we can determine whether China is engaging in such activity? Really, are there any parameters? Is there anything that we measure to determine whether this agreement is being adhered to?
Yes, ma'am. In an unclassified form, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how we go about doing that, but yes, ma'am.
So one of the areas of, thank you, and maybe in another context, we can get to some of those questions. with regard to our ability to support our cyber capabilities, training and retention really important. And so in that regard, STEM education is critical. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you are doing to, any collaborations, partnerships you're doing with universities or community colleges to train a workforce for us?
So let's just take Hawaii as an example. Today, as a matter of fact, in Kinea, the Adjutant General for the Guard in Hawaii is meeting in the Kinea complex with U.S. Cyber Command, NSA, and elements from across the island on Oahu to try to look at, and to include the academic sector, how do we generate a more capable workforce, both to meet Guard requirements as well as to meet Cyber Command, NSA, and other elements? How can we partner more effectively in aligning that capability to deal with issues of common interest to us, in this case on Oahu specifically, and the state of Hawaii and more broadly? You see that same, Hawaii is an area where we probably have gone further than others, but you can see that same type of activity for U.S. Cyber Command right now with what we are doing with a handful of universities across the United States, from the West Coast, Carnegie Mellon, there's some West Coast universities, Tulsa, you heard one, there's, I want to say something on the order of 60 to 100 right now between NSA and Cyber Command. There's one area where NSA and Cyber Command tend to partner together a lot.
Obviously, that needs to continue because our cyber capability is something that is going to be an ongoing effort. You mentioned the importance of the private sector and a whole of government plus, outside of government approach to cybersecurity needs. So how do you envision the private sector's role?
So what we've tried to do at Cyber Command is, what I think the private sector brings is technical innovation, intellectual innovation, if you will, just broad knowledge of capabilities, and alternative ways to look at problems, if you will. Those are, at a macro level, the three things. When I look at the private sector, I say, wow, you really could add value for us in that regard. What we've done to date is we've created what we call the point of partnership in Silicon Valley, where I placed a very small element on the ground. The part that's interesting to me is I did not want U.S. Cyber Command people out there. Instead, what I wanted was one individual who's a U.S. Cyber Command individual, and then I wanted to harness the power of reserve individuals who are currently in the ecosystem in the Valley, working in their day-to-day jobs. We've just started that since last summer. That's starting to work out very well for us. It gives us a chance to get a sense for what technical innovation is going on out there. We approach them with different problem sets and say, hey, here's an issue we're still trying to work our way through. How are you handling this? Or would you give us some suggestions on how we might deal with it? I'm trying to see if we can replicate that model that we currently have in place in Silicon Valley in other areas. I'm looking at the East Coast next, kind of as an example of that, probably somewhere in the greater Boston metro area next.
So it sounds like more of an informal kind of arrangement right now, and maybe going forward, you would want to maybe institutionalize this kind of collaboration with the private sector.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rogers, I don't envy you with the job that you have, the complexity, and then the additional challenges that we have, as the chairman has said, about sequestration, things that are on the horizon that you have to worry about. That, and listening to the discussion, I think one thing that's very important is we're never going to have the perfect weapon. This is not, absent the United States coming up with a game-changing offensive or defensive capability of the scale of the Manhattan Project. You can't possibly get inside the decision cycles of the state actors, the organized crime, terrorists, and other people. And when you think about decision cycles in this realm, you think about every single day you get new malware, viruses, other technology added to your PC to deal with new threats that didn't exist a day or two or a week before. So I'm trying to get my head around how you really even segregate your scope of responsibility, which is largely, the vulnerabilities of, say, the DOD, or with however you would like to define your scope of ability, and how you differentiate that from the broader private sector threat. I mean, you've got 28 million small businesses. You have close to 19,000 businesses with 500 employers or more. You have distributed public sector infrastructure, whether it's electric, water, gas. And the concern that I have is what we have right now are the equivalent of guerrilla sniper fire or mortar attacks. We haven't seen, and I think that we will see someday, a nation state or organized crime or terrorist organization literally be in a position to execute a multi-pillar attack that if they're smart, and they are, what they will do is something to disrupt you and then disrupt your ability to react to it by attacking the private sector, which is also integral to your supply chain. So, you know, how are we looking at this on a global basis and understanding that as they continue to increase their abilities, they're going to figure out a way on a multi-pillar basis to go after communications infrastructure, a supply chain infrastructure, healthcare, electric, whatever public infrastructure may be vulnerable. How do we actually get these things to coalesce versus finding out we get a good job, we do a good job in DOD, we create the Maginot Line, and they just go around it and disrupt you from a different direction?
So you have very succinctly articulated much of the problem set and the challenges of how you operate in this environment, because these arbitrary boundaries that we traditionally consider, well, this is a DOD function, this is a private function, this is an inherently government. Cyber just blurs these lines. So even as I focus on the DOD mission, it's one reason why I've argued we have got to think so much more broadly about this problem set. Now, within the DOD arena, it's one of the reasons why, for example, if you look at our exercise and training regime that we've put in place, we try to do that not just within the DOD, but across a breadth of the private sector. CyberGuard is our annual exercise. It'll be in June of this year. We pick a different segment, if you will, every year. We're going to do the power segment in this year's exercise. I think it's something like 20 different corporations will be exercising with us, the Guard, state, local.
Well, that's what I'm getting to. It's almost as if your military exercises have to involve all of these players so that they have a better understanding of their vulnerabilities and the nature of the attack that would occur in cyber. And the other question that I had is, to what extent are we looking at state and local governments as a way to, at least in North Carolina, I served in the legislature, and we were talking about what we could do to work on cyber threats. And I saw it also as an economic advantage. If states became particularly good at grid hardening or at securing the physical presences and cyber threats within their state borders, they actually create an economic advantage for people to set up business in those states. So to what extent are we trying to lead and help make this problem a little less difficult at the federal level by making sure that the states and local governments are stepping up their game as a part of the effort?
So it's one of the reasons why there's a big Guard component to this effort, to ensure we can also try to address the state and local aspects of this.
Thank you. I have a million different questions. Sure. I think what I'll probably do is see if I can schedule some time in the office to go over a number of other ones. We may have to do some in a secured setting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the issues is, in fact, sort of the services being able, within their resources, to fully develop the units that they will detach to you, essentially, or provide for your operation control, since you won't have your organic units. Can you give an assessment of sort of where we are, where they are in terms of doing that across the services?
So that really goes to the heart of readiness, if you will. And one of the, so in September when I was with you, one of the things I said then during that session was that I thought one of the reasons why 16 was going to be such a big game changer was I thought we'd get more involved in the total breadth of capability sets, which we are. And then the other reason was because we needed to shift from a focus on IOC and FOC, the generation of capability, to actual readiness. Okay, guys, are we actually ready to employ this? So we have spent the last 6 months working our way through how do you define readiness in the cyber arena, down to the individual team level, so that I, as a commander, have an awareness of what the true capabilities of the force is, and Using the same mechanisms that we use to assess readiness across the DoD, I can provide policymakers and decision makers a true picture of this is just, here is what this force is really capable of doing. We've just started doing that. I've gone through 2 straw men so far with the team. We're going to do a 3rd and final one this summer, and then by the end of the summer in September, I will start providing to the DoD on a quarterly basis by team. Here's where we are in terms of true readiness.
Is the nightmare scenario that one of these nations acquires the capability to shut down satellites?
I mean, that is there's two scenarios that really concern me. One is the physical shutdown and interdiction of capability. The other scenario that I...
Explain the first one.
If you were to shut down, look at it from a narrow DoD perspective, because much of what we rely on for our enablers as a department, our commercial infrastructure, power, our ability to move force, for example, if you were able to try to take that away or materially impact the ability to manage an air traffic control system, to manage the overhead structure and the flow of communications or data, for example, that would materially impact DoD's ability to execute its mission, let alone the broader economic impact for us as a nation. The other concern I have is, to date, most penetrations of systems that we've seen by actors have either been to steal data or to do reconnaissance. What happens if the purpose of the intrusion becomes to manipulate the data? And so you can no longer believe what you are seeing. Think about the implications of that if you couldn't trust the military picture that you were looking, that you're using to base decisions on, and let alone the broader economic impacts for us as a nation.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you,
Senator.
Admiral, for being here and for the job that you're doing every day to protect the country. I wanted to first start with a statement you made earlier, I think, to a question from Senator McCain about, does Russia have the capacity to inflict serious harm to our infrastructure? And you said yes. Do we have capacity to inflict serious harm to Russia's infrastructure?
In an unclassified hearing, I'd rather not get into that if I could, ma'am. I don't.
Let me put it in the context of, I assume there is some mutual deterrence that goes on when we're talking about some state actors.
Again, it's a lot more complicated than just a yes or a no.
Okay, well, I hope that we will be able to ask that question in a
Yes,
classified
ma'am.
setting. I had the opportunity over the last 2 weeks to visit Estonia, which is, as you know, one of the most wired countries in the world, and also probably the first victim of a cyber attack by a nation state, by Russia. And I had the opportunity to visit the cyber center that's been accredited by NATO, and to hear them talk about how they think about cyber issues. And can you talk a little bit about how Cybercom works with our NATO allies?
So I've been in Tallinn myself. I've been to the center. I was just in Brussels, for example, in December, and as U.S. Cyber Command, I addressed the North Atlantic Council, as one of the member nations. I was asked to talk to the leadership of the alliance about implications of cyber and how might the alliance, just one voice, I'm the first to acknowledge that, how might the alliance work its way forward as we're trying to deal with the cyber arena. Cyber Command, I try to partner both with the alliance as a whole as well as specific member nations on specific issues within the alliance. What I've suggested to NATO is I think the real key is you got to get the defensive house together, number one. And then secondly,
Explain a little more what you mean when you say that.
much like we've seen on the U.S. side, I've said, look, I see NATO is spending a lot of time, and it's a good thing, focused on defense of NATO's fixed infrastructure, but I also remind them that I think there's value in spending time thinking about, for example, as NATO is creating additional capability, additional force constructs to be able to apply traditional capability in a much faster way. I've also been part of discussions where I remind them, even as you're generating that additional force, that additional capability, you need to be thinking about what are the cyber vulnerabilities and the cyber defense implications of that. because we can spend a lot of money on generating new capability, but if it's got inherent vulnerabilities that quickly negate its ability to actually be used, that's not a good situation for the alliance or for us. We're dealing with the same challenges. I've had those discussions with the alliance writ large.
And so how do we increase their participation in training exercises like CyberFlag?
So for CyberFlag, for example, we have some NATO nations that participate in CyberFlag, which is U.S. Cyber Command's largest exercise. I won't say we have all 28 member nations at CyberFlag. Over time, you'll see more and more nations participating. One of the things I've talked to NATO about, although we haven't yet fleshed out the how, is how might we go about taking a look at a cyber exerciser training regime. I'll be the first to admit this is just a preliminary discussion, but when I was there in December, I said, hey, look, I think this is something we need to be thinking about.
One of the things that I was really interested in Estonia was hearing about their Estonian Defense League. And you were talking about earlier in your testimony about the effort to take advantage of the expertise in the private sector to help us as we're looking at cyber issues. And I was very interested. One of the things I heard was that the reality is we can't completely prevent a cyber attack. And so what we've really got to do is be prepared to respond to that attack in the way that is most effective and most and fastest. And they were talking about their Defense League as one way that they are able to do that. Is that something that, recognizing that we're probably not talking about, but is that what you're looking at when you're talking about the teams that are being set up to help respond?
It's a little different in the sense that the idea behind the Cyber League for Estonia is you have private citizens who volunteer on a voluntary basis will apply themselves at specific problem sets as they emerge, kind of after hours, after work, on their own time. That's kind of the model for the Cyber League in Estonia. And they use that to augment their government and private sector capabilities. On the U.S. side, for us in the DoD, that Cyber League, I would argue, is a cross for us in our structures between the digital service arena that DoD is creating, as well as the kind of guard construct. Although the difference is when the Estonians do it, you're doing it purely on your own time, purely as this is not as a uniformed member of the Guard or Reserve, so to speak. So it's not exactly the same, but the thought process, the idea of trying to tap that is similar.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you, Admiral Rogers, for your service to the country. I wanted to just ask you a basic question. You have a substantial responsibility in your position. What keeps you up at night? What is you're most worried about that we need to understand?
Well, let me be a bit of a smartass and say, based on the workload, I have no problem sleeping. But secondly, there's three things generally I highlight. Number one is actions taken against critical infrastructure in the United States, damage or manipulation. Number two, what happens when actors start to no longer just enter systems to do reconnaissance or to steal, but actually to manipulate or change data so that we no longer can believe what we're seeing. And the third and final thing in the cyber arena is what happens when non-state actors start to view cyber as a weapon system, and they want to use it as a vehicle to inflict pain and against the United States and others.
And to the third point you just made about non-state actors using cyber as a weapon system, how grave of threat is that to us currently?
I would argue that it is not, it's one of these, you say it and then tomorrow something will change. But today what I would tell you is I have not seen groups yet make huge investments in this, but I worry that it's a matter of time because it wouldn't take long. One of the challenges of cyber, in addition, we previously talked today about how it doesn't recognize boundaries. It doesn't take billions of dollars of investment. It doesn't take decades of time, and it doesn't take a dedicated workforce of tens of thousands of people like you see most nation states deal with problems. That cyber is the great equalizer in some ways.
And what are the greatest risks, to the extent you can describe them here, to our critical infrastructure, the first issue that you?
I just worry, in that regard, what I worry is, based on the accesses and the activity that I've seen of some nation-state actors out there, what happens if they decide that they want to, for some period of time, disrupt the things we take for granted? The ability to always have power, pumps,
Power system.
power
Financial
systems, to
system.
move money. I mean, if you take a look at the scenario in the Ukraine on the 22nd of December, imagine had a scenario like that unfolded in the United States. I'm not going to argue that someone's capable of making the United States totally go dark, but I would argue there's capability there to cause significant impact and damage.
That's why you discussed in your opening testimony the need for the coordination between government, private
ma'am.
sector, and across the whole of government.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, the law that was changed by Congress in terms of the NSA, the holding of information, the USA Freedom Act.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us an update on what is happening with that and whether that's working and any concerns you have? I think it's an important question
Right.
for us to check back in with you on.
Yes, ma'am. So if I could, in an unclass hearing, I'm not going to go into great detail. What I would say is, and what I've said to the intelligence oversight committees, we have been able to comply with the act and to do it on time. There has been some level of slowness, but that, in terms of difference from the old system or the new system, but that.
In terms of how quickly you can get information.
Right, that time duration is minutes or hours. It's not days or weeks. So it hasn't yet gotten to the point where I felt I've needed to come back to the Congress or the administration and say, hey, look, I'm seeing a significant material impact in our ability to generate timely insights, because I made that commitment. I said, if I saw that, then I believe I owe it to the nation to make that point. I have not seen that yet.
But there's no doubt that it's taking longer in some ways.
In some ways, it takes longer.
Well, I think it is important for you to come to us with that because, given that minutes and hours can make a difference
ma'am.
when it comes to terrorist attacks and preventing them and taking action, I think this is really important for all of us to understand, given the world that we are living in. I wanted to ask you a final question about the JCPOA, or the Iran deal. In there, there's a provision that said that the U.S. must cooperate with Tehran through training and workshops to strengthen Iran's ability to protect against sabotage of its nuclear program. Admiral Rogers, from a cyber perspective, has the U.S. helped Tehran strengthen its ability to protect against sabotage of its nuclear program?
Ma'am,
post this agreement?
I cannot speak for the U.S. government as a whole. I can tell you U.S. Cyber Command has not participated in any such effort.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Admiral
Senator.
Rogers. And I have missed some of the discussion. I don't want to be needlessly repetitive, but I want to go back to an interchange that you had with the chair in the opening questions that he asked. I met recently with a senior military leader who kind of tried to basically summarize his sense of things, and he said, we have plans but no strategy. And I've been thinking about that. I think in your back and forth with the chair, you talked about, and I think others may have asked you about this a little bit, this notion that we are kind of reacting case by case to cyber attacks and kind of deciding in each instance what we want to do. But the development of a broader doctrine, whether it's, what will a deterrence policy be that we might communicate? How do we view a cyber attack under Article 5 of NATO in terms of triggering a collective self-defense, the collective defense obligation? That we're assessing those things, but we're kind of not at the end point of answering a lot of those questions. Could you talk to us about the kind of doctrinal development process and in working on these questions? They're so important. What might we expect from the Pentagon, from Cyber Command in our interaction and our oversight in terms of the development of doctrines that have greater clarity and that aren't just kind of pragmatically reactive?
Right. So you'll see in the DoD cyber strategy, for example, we got a broad overarching framework within the department about how we're going to both develop capability and then employ it. Cyber Command is part of the broader dialogue within the department about how do we align the capabilities of the force with the world that we're seeing today. One of the arguments that we've made over the course of the last 6 months is we need to take an element of the cyber capability we're generating and focus it very much in the deterrence piece. How do we shape, potentially drive opponent choices and behavior before we get to the crisis scenario? We're in the early stages of that, but I'm very heartened by the fact that we now have broad agreement that that's an important part of our strategy and we need to be doing that. So we're just starting the early stages of that journey. The department participates in the broader dialogue within the U.S. government as to about how, from a national policy perspective, how are we going to move forward in addressing some of the issues that you have all raised today. Meanwhile, for me as U.S. Cyber Command, what I remind our team is we know that capability is going to be part of that deterrence strategy, both offensive and defense. Guys, that's what we get paid to do. We have got to focus on generating that capability today. So we can't wait for this broader discussion to complete itself. That's just a losing strategy for us. So that's kind of been, if you will, the focus for U.S. Cyber Command at the operational level that I and the team really focus at.
Let me ask you another question, and I think Senator Shaheen may have asked this before I came into the room with respect to NATO, but another item that's very common in this committee as we look at the postures of other commands is joint training exercises. India does more joint training with the United States than any other nation. We have Marines deployed throughout Africa and these special purpose MAGTAVs doing training of African militaries. What is our posture vis-a-vis sort of partners in the cyber area, in the training that we do together, in the development of joint resiliency strategies?
So we do some level of training with key allies. One of the challenges for us, quite frankly, is how do you maximize capacity? So it's all about prioritization. You cannot do everything you would like to do with every nation that you would like to do it. So part of our strategy is how do you focus the greatest return, and what are the nations that you want to start with? So we have done that. The other challenge I find is, and this is part of an ongoing internal discussion for us, based on where we are in the journey right now, I can't do so much with the external world that it negatively impacts our internal ability within the department to generate. Because unlike some mission sets where we literally have decades of infrastructure, capability, capacity, and experience, we don't have that in the cyber arena. So the same force and capability I'm using to help train and partner with foreign counterparts, I'm still building every day. So that's part of the challenge for us right now. I don't think it'll be as much an issue in the future as that capacity fully comes online, but we're not there yet.
We trained aviators out of other service branches, and then we created an Air Force Academy in 1954 and decided, okay, we're going to train aviators. Not that we don't train aviators in the other service branches. I think Senator McCain may have had some training somewhere in his past, but we created an Air Force, after World War II. I've wondered about whether the cyber domain would eventually become so significant that there may be the need to consider creating a dedicated cyber academy, much like the Air Force was created in the 50s. Now, the question is, you can train cyber folks everywhere and have them percolate throughout the service branches, or you can focus on a particular cyber expertise, and then those folks could go into the different service branches. Has there been any discussion or thought about that?
I mean, it's been a discussion. My input to that discussion has been, I'm not right now, based on my experience and what I see, a proponent of that approach, because my concern is to maximize effectiveness in cyber, you need to understand how it fits in a broader context. And I watch at times when I deal with elements in our own workforce who are incredibly technically savvy, incredibly smart about the eaches of the mission, and yet when I try to remind them, remember, we're applying this as part of a broader strategy and a broader context. When you don't understand that broader context, you're just not, in my experience, you're not as effective, and that's my concern about that approach. It'll start to really make us very, very
siloed,
narrow and siloed, and I'm just concerned about the potential implications of that.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Admiral Rogers, thank you for appearing again for the committee. If I heard you correctly, you testified to Senator Ayotte that your three main fears were threats to our critical infrastructure, the ability to manipulate systems such that we might not have faith in their operations, and third, non-state actors using cyber as a weapon against the United States. Is that an accurate account?
Yes, sir.
Are either the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda able to do any of those three things at this point?
I haven't seen them yet, but my concern is That's now.
So the Islamic State has a reputation for being very effective online. What we infer then is online recruiting and propaganda is a distinct skill set from the use of cyber as a weapon against
Yes,
things
sir.
like electrical power grids and so forth.
Yes, sir.
How hard would it be for a non-state actor like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda to develop that skill set? Is it nothing more than recruiting the right person?
It would not be difficult. It's about recruiting the right people with the right focus, but it's certainly not beyond their ability if they decide. I believe it's not beyond their ability if they made that decision.
When we think about other potential non-state actors, do those groups that have that capability or are approaching the capability tend to be associated with state actors?
In some cases, yes, but not in all. Not in all.
Okay. I want to turn now to the ongoing debate about encryption. I think data security and cybersecurity is obviously critical in the modern world. Most people in this room probably have a smartphone in their pocket. Even my 70-year-old father finally turned in his flip phone and got a smartphone recently. We keep emails, text messages, phone calls, financial information, health information, many other sensitive data.
He's ahead of Senator Graham.
On our phones. So I think data and cybersecurity is essential. I also think physical security is essential, right. And I'd hate to see Americans get blown to pieces because we had an imbalanced priority of cybersecurity over physical security. How do we strike that balance as a society?
My first comment would be, I don't think it's either or.
I don't either. There has to be some kind of...
My argument would be, we don't serve either viewpoint particularly well when we cast this as, well, it's all or nothing, it's either or. My view is, over time, we have been able to integrate ground-changing technology in the course of our nation and to do it in a way that enables the nation under the right circumstances with the right level of control to be able to access that. And for me, my starting position is, what is it that is different about this that would preclude that from applying here? I just don't personally see that, even as I acknowledge there's no one simple answer. There's probably no one silver bullet. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. But I look at the innovation and the can-do approach that we have as a nation to this, and I'm thinking we can solve this.
Like, for instance, a decades-old law known as the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, which tells telecom companies of any size that if they want to construct a telephone system in this country, it has to be susceptible to a wiretap pursuant to a court order. If the court finds probable cause to order a wiretap against, say, a terrorist suspect or a human trafficker or a drug dealer or so forth. Similarly, we all expect privacy in our bank accounts, but banks obviously must maintain systems in which they turn over bank account information subject to a court order against, say, a potential money launderer. Is there any reason our society should treat data and tech companies differently from how we treat telephone companies and banks?
I mean, that's clearly a much broader issue than Cyber Command. I won't get into the good or bad, so to speak, but like you, I just say, look, we've got frameworks in other areas. Why can't we apply that here?
Okay. These questions have been about the larger debate about encryption going forward, the way smartphones are designed, the way messaging systems are designed. There was a case recently involving Apple and the FBI and the San Bernardino shooter, in which the FBI requested Apple's assistance to override a feature of an iPhone. Apple refused. The FBI apparently found a third party capable of doing so and has withdrawn that case. Should Americans be alarmed at this kind of vulnerability in such a widely used device?
The way I would phrase it is, vulnerability is an inherent nature of the technical world that we live in today. And if your desire is to live in a world without vulnerability, I would say that is probably highly unlikely.
Do you know if we've shared that vulnerability with Apple, the United States government?
As the U.S. Cyber Command, sir, I apologize, I don't know.
Thank you.
Admiral, one other point. We know for a fact that Baghdadi is sending young men into the refugee flow to commit acts of terror wherever they can locate. Is it true or very likely that they also know of a website to come up on secure so that they can communicate back with Baghdadi and his tech
Yes.
So right now, there was a media report that 400 young men had been sent into the refugee flow. I would assume then that at least some of them are armed with a website to come up on once they get to a preferred destination so that they can coordinate acts of terrorism.
A website or an encrypted app, yes, that's probably likely.
That's a bit concerning, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So what should we be doing to counter that,
So
besides take out ISIS?
I think we need a broader national dialogue about what are we comfortable with. It's not either or, because we have got to have security and we've got to have safety and privacy. And at the moment, we're in a dialogue that seems to paint it as, well, it's one or the other. And as the dialogue we just had with Senator Cotton, I don't see it that way.
And yet, we know of a direct threat of an attack in Europe or the United States, and a technical capability to enhance their ability to commit this act of terrorism.
Yes, sir.
Isn't that a pretty tough? So we need a national conversation. Do we need more hearings? Do we need to urge the administration to come up with a policy? What are our options here?
Well, the worst-case scenario to me is we don't have this dialogue, and then we have a major event. And in the aftermath of a major event, we decide to do something that perhaps in the breadth of time we step back and ask ourselves, how did we ever get here?
I don't think there's any doubt that's a likely scenario.
That is what I hope it doesn't come to. But to date, for a variety of reasons, we just have been unable to achieve that kind of consensus. But we have got to figure out how we're going to do this. And you don't want a law enforcement, I believe, you don't want a law enforcement individual or an intelligence individual dictating this, just as I don't believe you want the private sector, a company dictating this. This is too important from my perspective.
Is awareness of this threat important for the American people to know how serious this threat is?
Yes.
Senator King.
Mr. Chairman, hearing this dialogue and the discussion you've just been having, it strikes me it underlines the foolishness of continuing to be governed by budget decisions made 6 years ago when this threat was nothing like the magnitude that it is today. And here we are dealing with a major new threat and trying to fit it within, to shoehorn it within a budget structure that was, that clearly did not take account of the fact that we've got a major new threat and a serious one that we're facing that's going to take resources to confront. I just can't help but make that point, that it underlines the fact that we're governed by decisions made at a time when circumstances were very different than they are today.
Well, I thank Senator King, but Admiral Rogers has already made it clear, I think, in this testimony that sequestration will prevent him from carrying out completely the missions that he's been tasked with. Is that correct, Admiral?
Yes, sir. And my greatest concern, if he went to sequestration, would be the impact on the workforce, particularly the civilians, who would argue, so is this what I want to be aligned with? That concern, I can replace equipment. It takes us years to replace people.
And there is a real likelihood that if we continue the sequestration, that you will have to, you will not be able to continue to employ these outstanding and highly selected individuals.
Yes.
You know, sometimes, Admiral, I do not want the American people to see what goes on at these hearings, the old line about laws and sausages, but I certainly wish the American people could hear and see your statements that you're making today, rather than, as you just indicated, an attack, and then we always overreact. that's just what democracies are all about. And so I thank you for your good work, but I also want to thank you for your straightforward answers to questions that were posed by the members of this committee. And we thank you. Hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.